This story begins by telling that the protagonist of our story loses his father and sister when he was very young. This tragedy marks him deeply, but his mother, a very wise and strong woman, told him that he must become a shaman, following an ancestral tradition of his family. However, the protagonist, seeking a different path, remained reluctant to such an idea. So this rebel without a cause decides to focus on academic studies, instead of accepting the shamanic destiny his mother suggested. 10 years after deciding to pursue an academic life, the protagonist dies in a traffic accident. This tragic and sudden event puts an end to his life, leaving him with many unanswered questions and unfulfilled dreams. And now, he couldn't believe he had been reincarnated, and he finally understood the wrath of destiny his mother used to talk about. Fortunately, our protagonist is reborn in a new world, one completely different from the one he knew, finding himself in a strange environment full of mysteries, with new opportunities and challenges ahead. Leaving as a premise the fact that people cannot understand what they have not experienced. And he had already crossed that threshold, and we see that he has become an undercover professor in a magic academy. Then the scene changes. In the imperial capital, passengers are boarding a train. One of its attendants asks a young man, possibly our protagonist, to verify his ticket, and wishes him a good journey. Before starting the journey, he meets a bearded man named Gerard with whom he must share a compartment. While traveling on the train, Ludger reads in a newspaper that the civil war in the kingdom of Utha has ended with the victory of the princess's faction. This news is important to him, as peace in Utha has implications for his own mission and destiny. And they both introduce themselves. The young man calls himself Ludger and reveals to Gerard that he has been hired to work at the Zoran Academy of the Exile Empire. This job is an honor and a great opportunity for Ludger, as the Zoran Academy is a prestigious institution where he can develop his skills and knowledge. But suddenly, an explosion shakes the train. Gerard suggests it's an ambush, probably aimed at the rich merchants or nobles on board. The calm and safety of the journey are abruptly interrupted by chaos and danger. An armed criminal attacked the train, spreading panic among the passengers. Ludger, showing exceptional bravery and skills, confronts the attacker. In the process, he manages to temporarily paralyze him, gaining a respite for himself and his companion. Ludger interrogates the captured criminal, seeking information about the attack. However, the criminal laughs at his efforts, and in an act of desperation and defiance, detonates a bomb, sacrificing himself and causing more chaos and destruction. Gerard survives the explosion, and while recovering from the impact, he laments the apparent death of Ludger. It leaves him with a feeling of loss and disorientation, as the young man had proven to be a leader and protector in a time of crisis. Later, it is revealed that the bearded man was just a disguise. He was someone undercover. When he removed everything from his face, we saw that he was a young man who was our protagonist. Now, he reflects on his past life, revealing that he has used many names while wandering the world, always in search of a purpose. His life has been a series of reinventions and adaptations, with each name representing a different phase of his existence. And this is how he becomes Ludger, a man he adopted in that new world where magic and political conflicts dominate his daily life. Meanwhile, the train continued moving, and he encountered an employee. And using his observation and deduction skills, Gerard discovers that the employee is actually an infiltrated criminal. After a brief interrogation, Gerard manages to stop the criminal before he can carry out his plan. But at that moment, hundreds of bullets appear in the train. Then, armed soldiers enter asking how he was still alive after their attacks, trying to attack again. But their weapons no longer worked, claiming he should be a sorcerer, but another sorcerer appeared. This one was surprised that there was another sorcerer on board, whom he asked to surrender, and thus he would not have a painful death. The protagonist, after many deductions, decides to leave the train. After checking, they stated that the idiot should have died, but a sword lodged in his skull. They yelled at everyone to shoot towards the ceiling. Feeling their steps, they followed, but an explosion appeared. The soldiers were now dying of fear. His movements were extremely effective. It was like a hunter, deducing that maybe he could be a mercenary. They already heard a noise. The bastard had separated them from the train, believing that in the future they would take revenge on him. But a huge aura scared them all, and the protagonist would punish their insolence. The sorcerer demanded of him how he could kill like that, saying he didn't have a shred of humanity. The protagonist claimed that they had sought death, and besides, he was going to let them go. But they had seen his face. He just shouted at him who he was, but his body was cut by an ice blade. It was the Knights of Cold Steel. These warriors were known for their skill and bravery, quickly eliminating the remaining criminals, guaranteeing the safety of the passengers. Their arrival was a relief for everyone, and Gerard was present at such a timely intervention. Among the knights, Veronica, the vice captain, stood out, who spoke with Gerard and expressed her gratitude for his bravery and actions. Once at the Tyval train station, the chaos caused by the criminal attack draws the attention of the authorities. A metropolitan police officer arrives at the scene to investigate the incident. During the investigation, the officer suspects an internal conspiracy with the help of a sorcerer, and they begin to interrogate those present. Gerard starts to feel nervous, as upon boarding the train, his appearance and face were different. They wouldn't match his identity, and if they found out, he would probably be murdered. He couldn't escape because there were tons of officers outside, and they announced the compartment number where our protagonist was. He gave the characteristics of the identity, feeling that it was fine, but he still had to accompany them. However, the captain explained that since he had helped them, he couldn't be a suspect. If so, they accepted him, giving him the name Mr. Ludger, surprised that he had been assigned to the Soren Academy. The protagonist, seeing the turning point, nodded. That's right. His name was Ludger, the next professor at the academy. At the end of the incident, Gerard got off using the name Ludger and said goodbye to the officer and to Vice Captain Veronica. And when he thought he had succeeded, with internal happiness for having emerged unscathed from all that, he thanked the real Ludger for being present on his journey, since at that time, photographs were not very advanced. That's why they couldn't distinguish the real Ludger. Now he would just escape to another city, but a man resembling a butler named Wilford addresses him by the identity of Mr. Ludger Chelsea. He cannot believe they sent someone for him, since he has no other choice but to get into the carriage. He does, and realizes that this could get out of control. However, he thinks about it better, and realizes that he must maintain the identity until he finds the opportunity to slip away from the situation. And just like that, in a moment, he had arrived at the Soren Academy. Wilford tells him he will take him to meet the director of the place. And this is how he is introduced to Miss Alyssa Willow, the director of the academy. Once reunited with Alyssa, he had no idea what might happen to him. However, it turned out that our protagonist was quite analytical and observant, and it becomes clear that she had never seen him in person. Finding him very handsome, this kept our protagonist less worried. Then she told him about all the benefits of his job as a professor at the Soren Academy. Gerard thought about how to adapt to the situation, and reading the contract, it would be for 2 years. But what surprised him was the large sum of money he would earn, which turned out to be something impossible for Gerard to refuse. And so classes would start soon, and he had to stay in a mansion all to himself, where he would also receive food and many other benefits, and they both closed the deal. He considered in his mind that he could perfectly pass as the young Ludger, and he also saw it as a possibility to escape his life. Thus, once again Gerard found himself accepting a new identity he hadn't expected. Upon arriving at the place where he would reside, he continued plotting how to resolve everything to prevent his true identity from being discovered, and how to make his false identity credible. He noticed that few people knew him in person. He detailed that based on his conversation with the young man in the train compartment, he was an only child. His parents had passed away, and based on what the letters with other relatives indicated, the relationship didn't seem very close. Once this was analyzed, he knew he needed to rest a bit, with the certainty that this identity was perfect for him. And so the days passed, and the date for classes to start at the academy approached. He was having breakfast, and suddenly, a mysterious figure with glasses and a hood, similar to a girl behind him, appeared. She informed him that she was glad to know he was alive. However, Gerard didn't understand what was happening and improvised answers on the spot regarding everything this strange person told him. In fact, she let our protagonist know that the other members, and we assume she meant some secret society or group, were curious to know the whereabouts of Sir First Order. The truth is that this person and the members she spoke of were surely looking for only one person. And they believed they were communicating with the real Ludger Chelsea. The mysterious hooded woman indicated with some fear that the terrorist attack was a major accident. They didn't expect the rebels to attack. Gerard could increasingly notice how far he was from knowing what was happening, but this wouldn't stop his answers from flowing so as not to raise suspicion. This mysterious person assured Gerard, or rather Ludger, that the secret organization had taken care of assassinating all the key figures of the academy, as well as getting rid of the traitors within their organization. She also confessed that the bodies of these people were mutilated and devoured by wild dogs so as not to leave traces. Gerard genuinely felt worried by everything he heard and decided to adopt an attitude of reproach and annoyance, to which this other subject reacted nervously and submissively, thus noticing the fear they possibly had of this Ludger. She agrees that they must meet with the organization, but Gerard, cleverly and intelligently, responds dismissively to make this subject feel fear again. So Gerard withdrew with the certainty that those people were definitely extremely dangerous. His attitude showed coldness, but inside he was aware of the fear this caused him. The hooded girl approached him again to ask when they would see each other again. But he preferred to answer with another question to make the mysterious messenger even more nervous. And so he left. Upon arriving at his residence, Gerard put together all the pieces about what the boy had told him in the carriage. It was evident that all that data was perfect for a false identity. That is, Ludger was already an infiltrator. And now Gerard had assumed that situation, believing he could get out of it safely, adopting the name of someone who never existed. Practically, the boy was an executive of an organization that planted dozens of spies in Soren. Checking Ludger's belongings, he found some letters with instructions on what he was going to do inside Soren. Another thing that messed with his head was knowing that he could be discovered by people from the secret society, without understanding anything about the First Order at all. Our protagonist at that moment already felt unfortunately on thin ice, thinking that he had 2 years in Soren that he had to endure. The next day, classes had begun. All the students were in the classroom talking about the new professor, believing that he would also resign. As happened with the altercation with Flora, the blue-haired girl, explaining that the previous professor had resigned because of her, since she knew more than the professor, and Ludger arrived just then, greeting them. And he would get straight to the point. His class would be about spell recitation. It wouldn't just focus on theory, and also, his class wouldn't be restricted only to second years. First years could also attend. Seeing their complaints, he asked for silence, clarifying that his class difficulty would not decrease. Seeing the question about why first years would be present, he explains that as an educator, he felt the responsibility to teach everyone equitably regardless of grade. But he warns them that if they expected easy A's because he was a new professor, they were very mistaken. But the protagonist's plan was for no one to attend his classes. The fewer, the better, because if second-year students took his class along with first years, their pride would be hurt. Besides, he had said it would be difficult, so few would attend. All the students remained doubtful about his methods. And so the class ended. Upon leaving, he felt he had done well, but after thinking hard, he didn't know if they feared him, or if they just wanted to avoid him. And he ran into Selina, another new professor, who introduced herself friendly. so he suspects she might have some connection to the information he received earlier. After that, Ludger Chelsea attends a meeting of new professors along with Abrino, in charge of the golem summoning class, and Merelda, who teaches captivation and cursing curriculum organization and dispersion. Despite initial tension with Chris Venamore, an aristocrat who despises commoners, Ludger decides to maintain his professional stance, so he decides to avoid him. And thinking about it, he can't trust any professor, because possibly someone there belongs to the First Order. Then the young woman he met devises a plan to get everyone to attend her classes, stating that Ludger stood out for being the youngest person to reach the 4th rank, and for his experience as a military officer. He is also known for contributing to the Cryptic House and the Magic Tower as an independent mage. The next day, he wonders how many students will attend his first class. The few who should be there are because they had no other option but to take his, since the others were full. But to his surprise, the room was full with 80 students, including many first years, which suggests that his reputation and methods have aroused interest due to an external factor. Now he felt his class was going to be very competitive, and so Gerard begins the class by introducing himself and describing the focus of his teaching. He plans to cover the 4 major specialties of spell invocation: release, elemental property, telekinesis, and reinforcement. Some students question his ability to teach all specialties, given that it is usually difficult to teach even just 2. Our protagonist, unfazed, assures that he will not lower the difficulty of his class, and that students must strive to earn extra points. To demonstrate his skill, he shows a 3rd-level fire elemental spell called Fluttering. He explains that the spell components are release, heating, combustion, compression, exposure, diffusion, and acceleration. He promises to teach how to invoke the spell 3 times faster, without modifying its basic structure. Seeing this, Flora was not sure about his teachings. That wasn't possible, believing it should just be a trick by a new professor. Throughout the class, some students ask questions about the viability of his method. Ludger confidently replies, affirming that it is possible to reduce the casting time without altering the spell technique. However, there is a female student who dares to challenge him with a phrase. That is impossible. Flora, a second-year student, challenges our protagonist's conviction about the impossibility of improving spell casting, since formulas are the only existing method to shorten recitation time. But talking about shortening it by 3 times is something no other genius has achieved so far. The protagonist explained that magic seems stagnant due to historical habits, but science has advanced constantly to the point where it is now threatening magic. He is not saying science is better, but that magic can improve equally. That's why he improved it. She only believed it was lies to feel superior. But the professor feels he must prove his point, asking what her average recitation time is for surrounding flames. She replies that it depends. If recited by a 3rd-rank mage, 10 seconds. A 2nd-rank mage could do it in 5 seconds, but since it was her, she could do it in less than 5 seconds. And so the protagonist asks her to cast the spell, Fluttering Flames. The blue-haired girl executes it in 4.78 seconds, an impressive time for her level, impressing her classmates. But he still thought it was too slow. According to his criteria, he felt mages of her level could do it in 4.41 seconds. But it was still too slow. The students didn't find what he said feasible, but the protagonist asked them to watch. Flora didn't understand what he was doing. That wasn't the technique for fluttering flames. Upon seeing the spell, everyone stood up from their seats, asking what had just happened, as the fluttering flames spell had been cast in less than a second, leaving everyone astonished. And this is how he explains that he has developed a technique called Origin Code, a unique method that optimizes the spell casting process by connecting mana with magical software through a biological hardware called the mage. She had never heard of that type of magic, asking who that person was. And so the protagonist penalizes Flora for her challenge and interruption of his class, with a deduction of 10 points. However, he also recognizes her extraordinary ability, from the previous demonstration of her fluttering flames, and grants her 10 reward points, thus canceling her penalty. Her friend was happy because she hadn't been penalized. Flora thanked him for his concern, but was still hurt by the confrontation. The class proceeds, and the students, both nobles and commoners, are amazed by what they just witnessed. Especially Aiden, a commoner who is amazed to have seen such a spectacle about the origin code in his first class. But he is interrupted by a blonde man who lets him know he can't believe he would be amazed by such a thing, assuming that's why commoners are simply worthless because of him. Thus, a tense atmosphere is created between Aiden and the arrogant golden-haired boy named Jevan, who was the son of a baron named Felio. He despises Aiden's status and tries to intimidate him. But just then, another student named Leo arrives, another student who is also a commoner, and defends him. Then he advises him to watch out for certain physical aspects so he won't be treated badly, and warns him about the hierarchies within the academy, mentioning the people he shouldn't confront or bother, like Flora Loomis, the talented but controversial second-year student, Elendil von Exilian, an exiled princess. And lastly, Freuden Wahlberg, leader of the second-year noble faction who viewed commoners as insects. And the fool from before was also part of that faction, and this is how they both bond and decide to go eat together. In another part of the academy, Professor Ludger walks through the academy halls, thinking about what happened in class. And he notes that he is around the 19th century, which has many shortcomings compared to the 21st century, which overflowed with science. That's why he was so familiar with science and magic, but he never thought his students would be so surprised. Although he had to find more things to teach, because otherwise, they might find out he wasn't a professor. Then he goes to his office, and the director was there. During the conversation, the director mentions her interest in Ludger's teaching methods, and warns him about the noble students, especially the blue-haired one and Princess Elendil. Although it seems the director slightly distrusts Ludger, she expresses her support and confidence in his ability to handle his classes. The truth is that afterwards, we see the director with the butler and apparently his right-hand man asking if Ludger was trustworthy. She felt that they still couldn't draw conclusions, but that man had resisted her evil eye twice. She hadn't been able to influence him at all. If that man were fourth rank, he should have fallen, and if he resisted, it was because he was an interesting guy. Thinking about what happened on the train and based on one of their possibilities, they believed the real Ludger might have been replaced. But it was only a theory. The man also thought he was an unusual guy, so they had to watch him longer. On the other hand, the undercover professor, aware of the distrust around him, reflects on his role and the relationships within the academy. He recalls his interaction with the influential Loomis family and their connections to the nobility, feeling that his family shouldn't react because he challenged their daughter. He even gave her reward points, and he also noticed a boy who possessed uncommon magic. Aiden, a student with unusual magical abilities. It also seems familiar to him, but he can't remember where from and remains intrigued by what is happening. Above all, the girl who called him Sir First Order didn't know Ludger's true appearance. That's why he accepted her reaction, believing that Ludger perhaps was also a specialist in disguises. So for now, he just had to maintain his role as a professor. Amidst further meditation, he receives a patrol order, a routine task assigned by contract. During his patrol, he encounters a conflict between nobles and commoners in the training ground. Lady Dynma was an arrogant noble who was trying to intimidate a commoner girl, demanding her submission. Since she couldn't be there just for being a commoner, demanding that now for her incompetence. She must kneel and apologize. But the commoner only accepted her authority and turned away. This upsets the noble girl about how she dared not obey her order to kneel, insisting on the superiority of her noble blood. Attacking her, even her companions were surprised, but someone intervened. She demanded who dared to interfere, but they asked what she was doing, how she could attack someone from behind, reproaching that he never imagined having such a big problem at the start of the semester, defending the principle of equality among all Soren students. So he takes matters into his own hands and reprimands Lady Dynma for her behavior, highlighting that her noble status does not grant her authority over other students. However, she insulted him completely, believing that in that place he was just a fallen aristocrat. The protagonist asked what she had said. She had to repeat her words, and Professor Selena arrived right then, deciding to intervene. However, Ludger had no intention of hitting or reprimanding her, but rather making her aware that he was a fallen aristocrat. But now he was at Soren and therefore a professor, so the girl had to respond to the warning and receive disciplinary action. In the same way, the girl they saved from the attack couldn't believe the professor remembered her name, since in his class, she was just a commoner among 80 people. She felt grateful, remembering the phrase that in Soren everyone was equal, believing that now she felt she could trust him and follow him, so she would do her best. Later, it is revealed that Ludger, in addition to facing personal problems, suffers from a condition that requires the constant use of pills to control his symptoms, which worsen with stress and the use of mana. Believing that very recently, he almost showed his ridiculous appearance. He felt the symptoms when he arrived at the training center, but he managed to hold them back. However, the symptoms got worse due to the incident. Furthermore, that was the last dose he had left. This would only last him 5 days, but getting more medicine without raising suspicion could become an urgent concern. So he had to contact that subject as soon as possible. Meanwhile, rumors and urban legends circulated in the academy. The sighting of a werewolf on the rooftops during the night had been reported. Professor Selena, although skeptical, is interested in the ghost stories surrounding the academy, suggesting a connection between paranormal phenomena and daily life at the academy. And while they are gathered, the conversation comes up through a professor, who expressed that the innovative spell called Origin Code caught her attention a lot, capable of shortening the spell casting time that he taught, something that surprised and filled some professors with curiosity, generating interest and at the same time envy among her colleagues, especially the professor named Crispa Nimor, whose gaze could kill anyone. After this, the protagonist was wandering around the city at night, and someone appeared behind him, attacking him quickly. The protagonist dodges him and sends him against the wall, feeling that he was late, believing his jokes were silly. He cursed at him. At least he should be a little surprised, believing that a lot of time had passed since they last saw each other. Ludger nodded, calling him Hans. It is told that Hans is a man with a special physical condition. He has the ability to transform into any animal that bites him. For example, he could be a bicolored cat or a bicolored dog like now. But the protagonist gives him an antidote to reverse the transformation, for which he was grateful. And he expressed that he had read his letter and had come when called, but wanted to know what happened on the train, and how he was a professor at Soren now. He tells him everything that happened and how he is now involved in trouble, and also reveals his affiliation with the Hidden Society, where he has achieved the title of First Order. Hans had heard something about the underworld. One of them called themselves First Order. The name of the organization was the Dawn Society, feeling that if they discovered him, he could be in serious trouble. Passing the briefcase he had asked for, he asked why he hadn't contacted him sooner, since he had arrived the day before. But he doesn't know what he was talking about. It had only been today. Besides, he didn't like walking on rooftops. Ludger now suspects that it could be another member of the society or someone more dangerous. And at that moment, they discover a real werewolf lurking nearby. The protagonist wants to investigate, even with his friend's warnings, believing something was shining on its neck. Therefore, someone must have released it. Feeling it was time to hunt, Han felt he had adopted the old hunter personality, reminding him of his name, Ludger Van Helsing. The wolf, sensing its presence, positions itself in front of him in a second. Seeing him, he correctly deduced. It had a collar on its neck. He had many questions to ask him. Therefore, he had to capture it, dodging its first attack. Then, with speed spells on the ground, he manages to evade the others, and when cornered, he unleashes an ultrasonic attack, causing pain in the beast's brain. In those cases, he couldn't use a bullet because it was too expensive, but that's why he would turn it back to interrogate it. However, police shouts suddenly appear. In that brief moment, the beast flees the scene, but the protagonist, using a grappling hook, is determined not to let it escape. The police realize there is someone on the roof, Ludger and the wolf, for an impressive speed. But the protagonist gets in his way. At first, he only thought of capturing him, but now he had no other option. The wolf, feeling threatened, attacks without thinking, dodging the first attack, but the shuriken also attacks him from behind. Ludger felt he had good reflexes, but he wouldn't have another chance, attacking with his magic. From the front and the side, repeating the sequence, lunging at him, this time he manages to stop his attack with his teeth. But he draws his sword. Meanwhile, Hans walks through the streets of the place, scared because he was almost caught. And a head fell in front of him. After talking, Ludger discovered that that wolf is not a natural creature, but an artificial cryptid created by some kind of experiment. They discuss the presence of a secret organization that might be behind these experiments. Ludger decides that although they have stopped the werewolf for now, they needed to continue their investigations and preparations, since the city where they were was an ideal place to remain hidden while gathering information. The next day, news appears on the newspapers. An unidentified killer had caused the death of 5 people. Witnesses described a hairy, black beast as the culprit, but officials only stated that it was a crazy killer. This makes no sense to the protagonist. He had killed the werewolf. This was only possible based on the premise that there was more than one creature loose. Then in Soren, the atmosphere was tense. 2 first-year students had been attacked by a beast. All the professors were talking about it. Rumors about werewolves had spread, generating panic among everyone. Later, in a meeting convened by director Alyssa Willow, it is confirmed that the recent attacks were perpetrated by a werewolf. However, the evidence clearly pointed to the existence of cryptids, and campus security was at stake. The director stressed the importance of identifying the culprit and protecting the students. One of the professors, named Hugo Borutak, skeptical, intervenes to insist that there are no werewolves in Soren. Those things were just ridiculous student stories. It was clear there were victims, so he knew it wasn't a werewolf, since both victims were of noble lineage. Therefore, he believed the culprit must clearly be a commoner student. Seeing his doubts, he expressed that it was obviously a werewolf, a fairy tale. His hypothesis was much more credible. The other professors agreed with that. Ludger believed that the Dawn Society was at a disadvantage against them, but in the academy, there was no kind of unity. Disappointed in the best academy on the continent. And just then, he receives a letter via a spider, informing him that 3 cryptid experiments had escaped. And therefore, they must be eliminated immediately, as they could jeopardize the organization's identity. Ludger never thought the Black Dawn Society was the culprit. For him, it would be fine if they were discovered, but if that were the case, his identity would be in serious trouble. During the meeting, the director and professors discuss the necessary security measures to protect the students. And she orders patrols to be organized, and students warned not to go out at night. The next day, he tells the girl to stop hiding. Seeing her clearly, it was the cafe girl. He never thought she would be there as a student, asking them to move to another place. In that place, he asks for her name. Then he realizes that the girl was a commoner, and Selindo explains that the recent attacks are the result of cryptid experiments carried out by the black mages of the school. Chamsis. This is a group of scientists expelled from the academy for their unethical practices. Some of these experimental subjects have escaped, and one had reached the city, causing victims there. Ludger decides to act quickly, although the girl suggests there are 3 loose experiments. He informs her that he had already captured one in Leiterberg. 2 days ago, Selina, impressed by the man's skills, continues to provide information about the situation. He plans to expand the search in the sewers, as he suspects the remaining cryptids might be there. As the conversation progresses, it is revealed that Selinda has infiltrated the school as a student to gather information. But this is strange, as possibly that job puts her in danger, believing that within the association there is also discrimination against commoners. Feeling that there are cracks in both the academy and the Black Dawn, believing that this incident could benefit him. And so they said goodbye, thanking her sincerely for her work, breaking the sound barrier. The woman just looked at the floor, thanking him. Meanwhile, the blue-haired girl didn't understand why they had conversed using anti-sound magic. Wondering what they could have been talking about. The next day, we realize that Flora is a very astute girl, since after seeing yesterday's events. She thinks it was possibly a secret conversation. It was clear something was up with the professor. In another part of the classroom, students discuss rumors about the wolf. And although some are tempted by the promised reward, everyone fears the penalties announced by the professors. And they are caught wandering. The light blue-haired boy asks what he thought about the wolf. He just thought they should avoid it so they wouldn't be punished and have points deducted. He sighed and thought the same. And then they greet Tessie. But she was furious. It is explained that the two of them had a duel, and she was unhappy because he had hidden his powers in combat. So they had to repeat it. He just refused because of the wolf rumor. Besides, if they were discovered wandering, they would be penalized, believing this was a perfect excuse. She just got angry, and if that was the case, then whoever catches the werewolf wins. Leo accepts. She demanded that he couldn't back out, leaving happily. And they confronted Leo about why he had said something so absurd. He felt it was to get her to leave and agree with her. Besides, the professors would handle the wolf. Obviously, she wasn't reckless enough to go look for him, but they worried, and looking out the window, they were surprised. They never thought he could get down so fast, and they became alarmed because he had already left the academy. Then Ludger does a patrol, remembering the encounter he had with the plump man, who had asked him for help caring for the commoners. However, for him in Soren, everyone is equal, and therefore he does not intend to break that principle. And in his disciplinary role, while patrolling, he penalizes several students with -5 points for loitering, accumulating up to 20 penalties. Believing that he knew the reward was great, but he never thought so many students would be taking risks. Then he heads to the sewage treatment plant, following clues suggesting the creature entered the city through the sewers. While tracking the footprints, he realizes there are 2 werewolves, one large and one smaller. The tracks separate, concluding that the larger werewolf is heading towards the school, probably looking for new victims. In the middle of his investigation, he hears a scream, believing that if he follows the tracks, it will be too late. So he would go where he heard the screams. Upon arriving at the place, he realizes there is a werewolf trying to harm 2 students. As he gets closer and closer, he realizes it might be too late. So he activates his fire spell, repelling the werewolf. The female students are grateful, but he only tells Ludger Van Helsing and Renee that they are penalized 5 points. She doesn't understand his lack of interest in her health and clarifies that she screamed so the students would enter. And stay safe. The other girl explained that she had fallen asleep while studying. Ludger applauds that student's spirit, but he needed to understand the situation, so he asks the blonde girl to take her away. This way, they would avoid their penalty punishment. While the wolf remained in front, but fled the scene, the professor chased the werewolf again. It was jumping across the rooftops. Ludger was also doing his thing. The girls were surprised that the professor used levitation magic. The two jumped to attack each other. The blows echoed throughout the area, mutually canceling each other out. The wolf tried to hunt him with its claws. Ludger dodged and attacked with fire magic, jumping and counterattacking again. The girls were surprised. They never thought mages could fight like that. And in the wolf's desperate attempt, it is counterattacked and neutralized on the ground. Ludger felt tired, believing it wasn't good for his students to show off their skills. So he had to end that as soon as possible. But the werewolf still had strength to move, which surprised him by throwing a rock. It couldn't be. How could a werewolf use tools, and this one attack the ground? The protagonist believes that beings shouldn't think beyond an animal, wondering if it really was a werewolf. Meanwhile, in another part of the academy, students Aiden and Leo were worried about their friend Tessie. Despite their concern about possible penalties, they decided to continue looking for the redhead. In their search, they heard a scream, which led them to follow her voice, and there they bumped into each other. She asked what they were doing there. They just followed her screams. She denied it. She never screamed, but now they heard a strange sound, a tired sound full of suffering. And upon arriving, they realized they had found a puppy werewolf. They wanted to take it, but he calmed them down, since if it was hiding, it was because someone had concealed it. It was clear that another werewolf could be nearby. They also noticed the puppy's collar, and something was behind them. Fear and horror breathed down their necks. Leo notices and protects Aiden, getting hurt. Tessie can't believe it was a real werewolf, but she tries to calm down. She had to do it to restore her family, but the wolf felt the magic attacking her. However, Aiden managed to save her. He asks her if she was okay, calming her down. There was no reason not to save her. His friend was in danger. She just reacted and expressed that the wolf was like that because it was protecting its sick puppy, which indicates unusual intelligence in the creature. Aiden tries to convince his friends that they didn't harm the werewolf, pointing out that even though the creature couldn't understand their words, its actions demonstrated its protective instinct towards its puppy, asking them to trust him. Expressing to the werewolf that he had medicine, possibly not much, but his son might improve at least a little. But at that instant, his body was pierced and imprisoned. Professor Ludger demands of them what they were doing there. They give cheap excuses, but he calms them. They would talk later. Aiden asks him to please wait. That man understood human words. He had to reconsider killing him. And just then, something was moving in the bushes. This makes him react furiously, pushing him out of the way and burning the beast, immediately asking them to return to their rooms. The next day, the kids were very worried about the punishment that awaited them. Meanwhile, the academy director had summoned them. During the meeting, the director acknowledged the seriousness of the situation and the recklessness of the students in confronting the werewolf without supervision. However, she also valued their bravery and determination in that situation. As a result, she imposed a penalty of 10 points on them, but also awarded them 20 bonus points for their bravery and ability to respond to the threat. Professor Ludger, although initially skeptical, accepted the director's decision and thanked the students for their effort. However, it had all been his idea, as he didn't want his image to appear soft. He had asked the director to say that. That's why deep down, he considered the children's attitude to have been quite brave. In his space and alone, the man was reflecting on what happened, as at that moment he saw that cub with half a human body. That meant those bastards hadn't captured wolves, but humans. So Ludger does not regret eliminating the werewolf, conscious that other lives would be in danger. The same as the 5 murdered earlier, so that the students would not see the gruesome scene. Therefore, he decides to contact his collaborator Hans to make a request. Elsewhere, Leo and his friends have many questions about what happened, especially about the collar, believing that, in one of the possibilities, they might have been artificially created. And they also doubted the professor, since his attitude at the end was because something worried him too much. It could just be their imagination. But for some reason, they believed that Professor Ludger might be connected to the rumors. But Tessie came out to defend the teacher since she didn't believe he had anything to hide as they suggested. Furthermore, if that were true, the director would have discovered it a long time ago. In parallel, Ludger and Hans were investigating the disappearance in the city, discovering that several city workers had disappeared. And in one case in particular, an entire family. That was what Ludger was looking for, believing he would go to the place where the experiments were conducted. Meanwhile, 2 security men were apparently talking about what had happened to that kidnapped family. As they talked about it, it is revealed to us that the werewolves were humans, transformed against their will. And the family that had escaped was looking for medicine for their son. They had been the perfect means to transform them, but the frightened child caused a lot of commotion. And the parents went crazy, seeing their son suffer. That's why they sought a way to flee, and at that moment, something was heard in the sewer. And their skulls were pierced by bullets, and Ludger mentioned that he had met with Hans, who had told him everything he knew about that factory and the culprits behind the experiments, where there were a total of 40 people. And upon saying goodbye, Ludger asked how old the boy was. Returning to the present, he was full of hatred, as the boy was only 7 years old. As they entered, screams of pain and suffering were heard, and we are shown everyone murdered. And a small wasp monitored everything, and in the last room, they reported that a rat had entered. With their information, it wasn't the security department. If it were, killing him wouldn't be a problem. Then everyone shot at the target, but their weapons didn't work because the bastard had used a nullification spell. So they had to draw their knives. Upon seeing the protagonist draw his weapon, they called him stupid. If he cast the no-weapon spell, his gun wouldn't work either, but his head was pierced. They couldn't believe it. Those were magic bullets, and at that moment, they asked them to step aside. Since even a mage would be finished if hit by that, shooting, but he didn't understand how he could have stopped the high-power electricity, and their machine was perforated. He electrocuted everyone present. And so Ludger brought the count to 20 people murdered. And looking at the ground, he knew someone was watching him. If it was because of an insect, he suspected it must be the insect brothers. So he had to take care of their communications first. He noted that all their signals had been cut by an abnormal vibration, sensing that the mage they were about to face must have the wind element. And Metal, believing that could be bad. Their small insects couldn't handle him, so he had to bring out the big ones, asking his brother to prepare. The others were calm, the only way in was that door. When he stepped into the room, he would die instantly, but the lights went out. And the subject, looking at his brother, was already decapitated. He couldn't believe the speed of that idiot, pulling the centipede from his arm and sensing a presence managing to dodge, wondering what kind of mage he was since he could. Master close quarters combat, and now he also didn't understand. His spell had been completed in less than a second. The others didn't even realize the enemy had already appeared. The brother demanded who the hell he was, but they were murdered. Nobody could believe that the two insect brothers had been killed so easily. But an attack appeared. He laughed. He had arrived too late to save his brother's life. The protagonist understood, so he was alive even after blowing his head off. He felt that his human body had been changed a long time ago, and the body began to transform. Everyone asked to run, but they were also caught by the transformation. Ludger was disgusted. He didn't even respect his own allies, and this one received an attack. Dodging, he cast his spell. But he couldn't believe it. He had dodged his attack despite having an enormous physique. Feeling its pincer, he attacked again, surprised because he was still acting normally even though. He attacked him head-on. This one nodded. If he wanted to defeat him, he at least had to use 4th-class spells. And when attacking, Ludger was no longer feeling anything, and attacking while dodging, he thought his movements were quite fast. Ludger thought that neither weapons nor degree spells worked on him. He couldn't use a 4th degree spell as it would take too long to cast, feeling he didn't want to use that. But he had no other option. Meanwhile, Hans waited outside, freezing, wondering if the fight was already over. And an explosion appeared. And upon seeing him again, the boy discovers that his ally was carrying a safe with him. Asking him what that was, he explained that upon inspecting the area, he discovered a drug that turned humans into werewolves. With this, Ludger told Hans that he already knew who was responsible. This one was surprised, but said nothing, since even if he told him something, he couldn't stop him. So he would go home. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a noble cursed his employees. For their incompetence, his anger was due to the experiments escaping. And this subject is a person obsessed with rejuvenating his weakened body, planning to use the drug to regain his youth and achieve perfection. But someone said his name, Belfort Rickson, and in a second he was already grabbed by the neck. He shouted at his guards, but the anti-sound barrier had already been deployed, and they asked him if in his damned experiment there was a 7-year-old child who had to face the reality that his family was suffering, who had smiled warmly when he was about to die as if thanking him for killing him, demanding if he perhaps knew how the man who murdered them felt. This one just smiled without remorse, since the experiments were a noble sacrifice for humanity. Besides, he shouldn't behave like that, as they were just commoners that nobody cared about. At least they gave him the opportunity to be of some use to humanity. Ludger asked him to shut up. His response had clarified his situation. Ludger injected a strange substance into the man's neck. He wondered what he had done. Ludger told him he had read his research records, finding them very interesting. A drug that could turn humans into werewolves, even with a small dose. But he was curious what would happen if that small dose was consumed in a large amount. And at that moment, this one transformed into a horrifying beast. The protagonist believed he would never understand how they felt, so he had to feel the same pain as them. At that moment, the employees heard screams of something, and upon entering, they didn't understand why a monster was there. They had to kill it immediately, shouting for all the employees to come and help. Then he returned to Hans, handing him a safe. This one didn't understand. Ludger asked him to take whatever he wanted. He had to return, but with a suitable identity for that world. Days later, it was reported on the news that the multimillionaire Belfort had been devoured by a monster in his own room, in which no trace of him remained, only the monster's corpse. Rumors about Belfort and his dark magic spread through the city, and the security department appeared at the scene, astonishing everyone because Commander Ederina Leonhold was there, who took command, forcing them to let her pass. Upon meeting the inspector, she ordered the transfer of all evidence found to the security department, highlighting the seriousness of the matter. Upon inspecting the mansion, they found a hidden place behind wallpaper, where there was probably a safe. Although the content had been stolen, the evidence of its existence pointed to a larger conspiracy. She knew that a skillful person was behind these events, capable of perfectly hiding their tracks, and of making a body disappear and a beast appear. And the only person she knew of a similar feat was a man named Arsène Lupin. That's why she asked Lloyd if there were any unusual cases in the city. This one mentioned a recent incident in an abandoned factory in the city, which wasn't very different in time. She felt there was definitely something there. That's why they had to go. Ludger, exhausted after the events, reflected on the effects of using his real magic, as it made him lose mana just by breathing. He had only been saved by his pre-made pills, but at least he felt he wouldn't have to worry about the threat of the wolves anymore. But in his mind arose the worry for Aiden, who had witnessed the moment Ludger burned the werewolf. And this one intervened until the end, believing there was no guarantee that he wouldn't say anything about what happened. So the protagonist felt he should eliminate him to leave no loose ends, but he denied it. Killing him would take too much risk. That boy was a special guy. The director was near him. If he did something, it would raise suspicion. So he didn't want to think anymore, he would rest. Meanwhile, the captain and her team investigated the abandoned factory, which had coincidentally been set on fire at the same time as Belfort's death. They suspected the factory was still secretly operating, possibly involved in black magic experiments. Lloyd, the other officer accompanying her, considered that the burning of the factory, the death of the wolf, were connected because both had been incinerated to leave no possible suspicion. But she still didn't have conclusive evidence, asking if there was another similar case. He believed there were none, except for the werewolf from the other day that had appeared at the academy. The students were safe. Since a professor intervened, she asked if the corpse remained, but he denied it. It had been completely incinerated. She was surprised. Connecting the loose ends, a burned factory, an incinerated wolf, and a disappeared corpse. Believing there were many possibilities, he would keep them in mind. Meanwhile, at the academy, everyone was talking about the wolf incident and that the professor had defeated it. The girl, meanwhile, couldn't find available seats, as everyone avoided her after that incident. But Princess Aura was very cordial with her, although many comments against her came, since she couldn't sit with a princess. But that event had united them, forming a bond, and their professor arrived, who would immediately start the class. This time, he would talk to them about manifestation traits, the basics, and the principles of elemental attributes. These were the foundations everyone should learn, but he was there to teach them the correct way to use them. That was a method that increased their power from 20% to 80%. The students mumbled that it was impossible, and they asked Anthony what attributes he could use. He said water, ice, and a bit of plant, asking him to manifest the one he had the most confidence in. Upon casting it, Ludger felt it was average. They had to observe carefully. The students couldn't believe that was the same spell. He really was on another level. And since everyone was interested now, he would explain the topic better. These were the 4 great elements. They were short and simple compared to the 10 they currently had. Asking his students why the fire attribute had developed so much. The one who answered correctly would get 5 points. Some said it was to scare away the darkness, others to burn and clean the forest, another to erase humanity's fear of the dark. But all were incorrect. However, Flora Loomis stated it was because it was used to burn and kill people. And that was correct. Burn with fire, drown with water, cut with wind, electrocute with electricity. Wars and massacres had been the reasons for the development of magic. However, heat also fought the cold. Water cured thirst. Wind and electricity provided light in the darkness. The purpose of everything can always change based on how it is used. Therefore, fighting for a better world should be their mentality to learn the elemental attributes. For that hour, everyone had to perform their spell. Then he gave advice to each student so they could improve, but then Aiden did nothing. The protagonist felt that this boy might be rebelling against him because of the incident the other day. But that wasn't the case. He was ashamed, but he couldn't manifest his magic. The protagonist didn't understand how a student from the most prestigious academy didn't know the basics. Being special, believing he couldn't leave him behind. This one apologized, asking him to continue with his class, but the protagonist refused. He couldn't abandon his principles. He had to gather his magical power in his hands. Now he had to focus his thoughts on magic. He shouldn't just use his head. He had to feel the attributes of the flames with all his senses. He had to recall the brightest flames from his memories. The shape, the sound, the smell, the sensation, everything. And he remembered the best memory he had with his family when he was 8 years old, in which he felt an inexplicable warmth. And so they congratulated him. It was quite good. The others were surprised that the professor could give compliments, and they explained that that's what creating your own magic was about. It wasn't just doing magic. Even a child could do it, but the greater the feeling they thought about, the more powerful it would become. That's why they should use their own experience to hone their skills. Those words make everyone improve exponentially, except for Flora, who already knew that concept. Surprised that he had tried to teach someone who didn't even know the basics. And he had even given her a compliment, feeling frustrated because she had humiliated her in public in the first class. Thinking she wanted to go unnoticed, but now she demanded that he give her a compliment too. Her friend was surprised. That was magic superposition. It was on another level. Flora thought that if she put the wind technique and created a vortex, it might work there. But the spell began to get out of control. Everyone asked her to stop. It was dangerous. And it was going to explode at any moment. Everyone screamed that they should retreat and move away, however. They asked her to concentrate. She must not give up. She had to control her magical power. He would help her. And the spell began to stabilize, and they asked her to keep concentrating. If she stopped her magic, it would disappear. And she wouldn't achieve anything. And it is told that Flora Lumos was a talented student who had always been the object of envy and resentment due to her exceptional magical abilities. However, what cost her the most and affected her was the cold gaze of her father, who always treated her with disdain, as if she were an illegitimate son or daughter. And the words from the first class made her remember her father's words. She couldn't even turn to look at his face because surely it was only judgmental eyes. And returning to the present, the spell had been completed. She had achieved it, but the protagonist thought she had done something naive. She had put the other students at risk. He had to be careful because she mixed ice and fire. They were elements that were not harmonious. This he accepted. He admitted that he forced the superposition of 3 elements. However, she completed it, and they were beautiful. Ludger remained silent, but showed her the true spell. Her elements were only beautiful in appearance. However, that was all. Just an exhibition magic. This one, upon seeing such a spectacle, admitted her defeat. She had improved her spell 1,000-fold, but they told her they didn't reproach her for the deficiency in her skill. In their eyes, she just wanted to use her magic to get attention. However, they asked her to find another path. She should value her feelings and concentrate on herself instead of others. She was surprised. Unlike her father, the professor never judged her. On the contrary, he was worried about her and what her powers could do if she lost control. And seeing her worry, he calmed her down. The professor had taken on the entire burden of the magic. He was exhausted. He was only saved because he had put a pill in his mouth. His head was fuzzy, but he felt that she not only superimposed elements at an early age, but she even managed it. Then he felt that everyone was doing very well, believing that he was possibly teaching a golden generation of students. During class, there was another person who had difficulties with her power. It was student Linny, as she couldn't invoke any element. So the class ended, and he asked her to come to his office. After her activities, fearing being expelled from the class due to her apparent inability to handle elemental attributes, she begged for her life that he wouldn't kick her out of his class. But to her surprise, Ludger had no intention of kicking her out. Instead, he gave her a rare book about magic, not related to elemental properties. Better called Magic Comprehension Without Property. It belonged to someone who was no longer in this world, but her task now was not to despair, as the world of magic was a path of infinite changes. Then she felt that having magic without property was surprising enough, but she couldn't believe she had the ability to see evil and good in his eyes, although she didn't know it yet, but she didn't expect that book to return to those eyes in that way. Wondering if it was destiny. Then Aiden felt he almost made it. The professor's method had helped him a lot, wondering how he had suspected him. And just in the distance, he wondered why the noble students were gathered. It seemed like someone important was there, and the blonde one appeared, mocking him because he was the boy who couldn't use the basic elemental attribute. His friend jumped to defend him, but they calmed him down. He didn't know what he had done to upset him, so he formally asked him to settle their issues by talking peacefully. This one accepted. First, he had to kneel. His friend got angry now, but they silenced her too. Did she lack manners? She was pathetic. Aiden got serious. He could mock him all he wanted, but he wouldn't let him mock his friends. This one laughed, so he wouldn't let it go. So he challenged him to a duel. This one accepted, although his friends refused, but with one condition. If he won, he had to apologize to them. This one nodded, and then they asked him what he was doing. The protagonist felt it was about Aiden again, and so they explained what happened, and he refused to cancel the challenge. The protagonist assumes it was about that subject, as the blonde wanted to impress him. Even if he refused, the other professor arrived, who stated that he could not break a duel. After much thought, the duel would take place, and Professor Chris had one more proposal. A bet he wouldn't force him, but the winner would have to share valuable information from their teachings. Ludger accepted. Chris gave his vote of confidence to the blonde, and the protagonist obviously chose Aiden. And so they agreed to fight in 4 days. The protagonist didn't care about anything, and Aiden apologized for putting him in a tight spot. He asked him to just think about winning for now. The blonde had the advantage for now, but it was too soon to give up. There were always variables in fights, and he had one inside him. He just had to bring it to the surface. Aiden nodded, but he didn't want to use that special ability. He wanted to fight with basic skills like everyone else. So he begged him to teach him how to fight with them, and it is told that in his childhood, Aiden had a teacher who warned him that this power could not be used lightly. He should only use it when necessary. In the present, the protagonist didn't understand what he was saying. That power belonged to him, it was his. Besides, he only accepted because he had that special ability, but he had no choice. He would show him how to have the advantage in combat with the elements, but in those 4 days. Their training would be hell. Then, elsewhere, the professor knew he would win, but he was going to make sure by giving him a magic amplifier to take before the battle. This one, although knowing he could be disqualified, didn't want to risk embarrassing the nobles. So he accepted. And so, 4 days had passed. The students wanted to see what would happen. It was obvious the noble would win by a lot, although on the other hand, they also had Professor Ludger, who had killed a werewolf, and on the other hand, a simple new professor. Chris heard all this, feeling that today they would realize he was just a fraud. And just then the director arrived, who had heard about the battle, so she had attended. They also found out about the bet between the professors, saying that each student would have protective equipment so they wouldn't get hurt. And so Aiden entered the battlefield. All the commoners cheered for him, although without much confidence. The nobles supported him. Upon meeting face to face, he asked them not to forget their bet. And they asked Aiden what that was for. Upon confirming it wasn't a sword, they accepted the staff as part of the attire. Since everything was ready, the first one to damage the other's armament won. Ready, set, fight. Both cast their spells at the same time. Their friends felt they had the same speed. The blonde thought he was better than expected, but due to his status, it was clear he had more power. Breaking Aiden's attack, this one managed to dodge, but another attack was coming, believing that was the difference between him and a pathetic commoner. His friends believed their friend was being pushed back. Aiden thought so too. At that rate, he was going to lose shamefully, but he felt it was time to use everything he had learned. Jumping forward, the blonde thought that had been a stupid move. The professor accepted it. The fight was over. But upon looking closely at the spell, he couldn't believe it. That was walking magic, wondering if he could really have taught him that in 4 days. And most importantly, a simple commoner had mastered that spell. The blonde doesn't understand how he could cast while moving, but he shouldn't get confused. His spell had been invoked earlier. With that he would win, but his technique was useless and Aiden attacked. Already on the ground, he felt it was his turn. And so the winner was Aiden. Everyone shouted for his great achievement. The others only felt disgust towards the noble. He had stained his noble honor, filling him with insults. This one wondered how he had lost. It couldn't be, that imbecile must have cheated. It was impossible for him to have acquired those spells in 4 days. So he was going to kill him. Everyone thought the blonde had gone crazy, while Aiden remembered the phrase, "In your life, the moment will come when you decide to use your ability." And then Aiden stepped in front of the attack. Nobody understood anything. Had he cut off the magic? Ludger sighed. He hadn't wanted to fight her, but he used her without hesitation at that moment. Chris was surprised because it was anti-magic, and the blonde was being beaten. He thought that at least he would admit his defeat honorably. He didn't know he was just a piece of trash. Freuden, meanwhile, wasn't impressed by anything that happened to the blonde, but that commoner did catch his attention. Meanwhile, he demanded if he knew that student could use anti-magic. The protagonist didn't know why he was so angry. He was also in charge of them. Information about the students was available to everyone. Besides, anti-magic was not in the battle, and regarding his investigation and knowledge. He didn't want them. He had only agreed to support his student. Leaving the place, this one became even more furious. How dare he treat him like that? Then he met Celinda, who congratulated him on winning, but felt he had drawn attention. This one calmed her down. The professor was suspecting him. Now he had a little more confidence, since if he gained more positive recognition, he would be out of all suspicion. And he also asked the same of her. If they saw each other daily, they would be suspicious, but if she excelled in her studies. That meant it was natural to see each other, so she had to be a model student. She was just excited about her task. Then Ludger mentioned that in the event, he was able to project an image of loyalty towards the director's faction, while sending a message to the Black Dawn Society, as he couldn't move so impulsively. However, Ludger knew he couldn't maintain that facade forever, so he needed to form his own organization. So, with the help of his ally Hans, they were determined to take more direct measures to consolidate their position. Meanwhile, a group of mobsters led by the infamous Red Pillar were planning their next move after losing a significant investment because of Belfort. Feeling they needed another investment, as they still had some money left. And just then the protagonist arrived, who, upon seeing their complaints that it was closed, calmed them down. He was James Moriarty. This one didn't understand. Was he the old criminal who reigned in the streets of Delica? He had hidden for years, so he had to prove his identity. Ludger nodded. He knew they would treat him as a suspect, but his weapons wouldn't work anymore. This one didn't understand. He had the weapon silence spell, and the door was destroyed. Everyone was surprised because he was a werewolf. They said Hans had explained that there were several dark organizations in the city. The largest force was one called the Red Gang. They did all the dirty work. After much talking, they decided to destroy that group, as they had lost a significant investment with the subject that Ludger. Even if it was a very large group, if the leader fell, the colony always crumbled. Returning to the present, Hans warned that if anything happened, he would run, and thus the red-haired man trusted him more now, asking him to tell him about the business he had in mind. They would help him. Ludger thanked them, but he didn't like dirty and disgusting things like them, so he never wanted the Red Society to exist again. He shouted at them to attack immediately. Ludger asked him to prepare to escape. They didn't understand him, they couldn't see anything at all. Meanwhile, the protagonist sheathed his sword. Then, in the blink of an eye, most had been murdered. Only the boss and his right-hand man remained, who felt he was very skilled in combat. He made the opponent drop his guard, exploiting the weakness, but as long as he was careful, he could win. First, he was going to close the distance. Upon seeing a smoke bomb, he thought that wouldn't work on him. He just had to deflect it, but his sword got stuck, cursing since he now had to abandon his sword and attack him head-on, but a shadow stabbed him. In his cold death, he never heard of a magic that could come from another place. Ludger, upon approaching, felt that now they had to end their conversation. Then they were drinking a 38-year-old Gorgonia, and asked him what he would do with the remaining people. This one was going to select some for himself, as he found documents and secret accounting books on the second floor. Hans sighed, believing it would be too much work for the two of them. That's why the protagonist had called them. This one worried. Those bastards were crazy. There was no agreement, but he knew that even if he complained, he would continue with the plan. So he accepted, but asked if they wouldn't raise suspicions. He calmed him down. Those mages would never try anything uncert, and his new organization would be called Uknoen. And so they toasted to the new organization. Then some professors were gathered and asked him why he still didn't have an assistant since he had 80 students. He pretended ignorance, but he never thought he could have one. He had been killing himself working just for pleasure. Even Professor Celinda had 3 people, but they were few compared to others. And so the new mission was to find assistants, and looking at the list provided by the female professors, he chose a student. Then he met the infiltrator, whom he asked about her class schedule. After much conversation, he wanted her to be his assistant since if she were, she could approach him naturally. And it wasn't suspicious, because she was on the list that the other professors had passed to him. She was only excited, nodding that she would help him as much as she could, and thus giving him a couple of tasks, feeling it was perfect. Since if he were close to her, he could learn more about the Dawn Society. And then, in just 1 hour, she had already finished what he asked of her, surprising him, and congratulating her for being so efficient. Then, in class, the girls felt the room was more agitated than usual. This was due to 2 things. They had found out that the professor was looking for assistance, feeling it could be a great opportunity for anyone, since being close to him could earn points for their records. And the other rumor is that they said the universal stone that granted wishes was somewhere in the academy, believing it could be true, since anything could exist in that place. But Flora felt they were just lies, but she was interested in being the professor's assistant, since she could have many benefits. But someone arrived at the desk. Everyone realized she should be the new assistant. And so the class passed. And then at the end, Julia Polmart, a noble student outstanding in tests, dared to ask Ludger about his criteria for choosing an assistant with a tone of superiority. He, with his characteristic frankness, explained that he looked at the person's character, not their magical abilities or their fame. However, he made it clear that after Julia's question, he would not consider her fit to be his assistant, implying that her character did not meet his expectations. After class, Flora intercepted him. Upon seeing him ask if she was looking for him because she wanted to be his assistant, she denied it. She just came to thank him for his previous advice. And upon saying goodbye, he only told her that if she changed her mind at any time, she could apply, since she had the aptitude to be an assistant. She just felt that this subject was too annoying. Then the director summoned him, telling him about rumors in the academy and the universal stone. This was true, it wasn't lies. It is told that this was a relic that had been there for a long time, and the rumors were so specific that someone within the academy must have leaked the information. This was because the relic had been moved to a safer room, so she wanted him to investigate if any person in the academy was a traitor. Ludger thought that she wasn't entrusting him with such valuable information. What she was doing was testing him, accepting his mission. At night, Ludger thought that perhaps the Black Order had started moving, but Zenilda hadn't told him anything. So it had to be someone different. In addition to that, a relic being there caught his attention. It is told that he had been changing identities for many years, sometimes as a mercenary, other times as a crime consultant, other times as a merchant, and there was a reason. That was to find the remaining pieces of his relic. He had attended that city because of rumors about it, but he never thought there would be one in the academy. Of course, it wasn't the one he was looking for, but he could use the universal stone to know the exact location of the ones he was looking for. He told all this to Hans, then he felt that could be his opportunity. He had already found 3 parts of his relic. If he used that power and found the remaining 4, then he could achieve it, leaving in doubt what he was referring to. Meanwhile, in the princess's room, she was frustrated because, given her status, she couldn't live normally. And then General Terina contacted her, who, with all respect, wanted to know everything about the incident. And the professor who defeated the wolves, and finally told her that her sister was sad since he hadn't contacted her. Then in classes, everyone was bored with the theory. So Ludger felt he had to teach them something more meaningful, mentioning that mages used their core as magical power, being like their own fairies, but he knew another way, making magic appear in a student. That magic was his, which he called coordinate formulation. Nobody had heard of anything like that, wondering where he knew so many things non-existent to them. But he would not teach them this spell. He explained that every magic developed with solid learning foundations, so his priority now was to pay attention to his boring theories. Everything he taught would serve him in the future. That's why they should learn everything he said, asking them to follow his methods and thus have a good future. And if anyone deciphered the magic he gave before, he would give them a lot of extra points. After classes, Ludger knew he was going to be contacted by the director, so he asked Celinda to wait outside. And so the director informed him that the universal stone had been stolen. The attackers knew the stone's reserve warehouse, and they got ahead before they could move it. The worried woman estimated they had until midnight to recover the stone, before the kidnappers used it for their own purposes. Ludger, aware of the gravity of the situation, decided to act immediately, and so they said goodbye. He knew that eventually this would happen, but he never thought it would be so soon, wondering what the hell was wrong with those guys, believing it should be the Black Dawn. But they hadn't informed him of anything, letting Selinda in, asking her if her organization had acted on its own. Upon seeing the affirmation, he asked her to tell everything she knew. Selinda spilled all the information she had about it and informed him about the Universal Stone, which had started with a third order, who, while gathering information, discovered a document related to the stone. Rumors about its existence and location soon spread among all students. The third order communicated this to the second order, but they didn't want to communicate with the first order because they wanted to do it themselves. Demels was in charge of all of them, and she suspected he wanted to ascend to the first order. Since Sir Order Zero had said that the top 7 places could always change order. That's why they had omitted all the information from him. Currently, they were on the run with the stone and were in the silent forest. Ludger thought he should move then, asking her not to do anything else and thanking her for the information. And her work. She thanked him as his words calmed her down. Ludger felt he only thanked her, sensing that the order must have treated her horribly to have that expression. And then he focused on his work. Using the Nocturnus spell, Ludger became invisible, making it difficult for anyone to detect him. But Flora suddenly perceived that magic, noticing something strange in the air. And she decided to investigate. It is told that that forest drove anyone with a weak mind crazy, and inside, some of the subordinates went insane, asking Sir Second Order what to do. They were surrounded and couldn't last long there. This one silenced them, as he had a plan but cursed the stone. It was useless, completely useless, and upon hearing something, they demanded to know who the hell was around there. But everyone froze. It was the First Order Lord, falling into despair, believing he was going to murder them all. So everyone knelt down, handing over the Universal Stone for the stupid things they had done. Ludger accepted their tribute, but said goodbye to them by stabbing them all. Ludger, seeing the stone, knew it wasn't a relic. It had incredible magical power. But that was all, wondering if the director had lied to him, and just at that moment, a spell appeared above his head. At the scene, she felt her plan had worked, while Ludger had saved himself just in the last second, feeling that he didn't understand why she had sent him there. Besides, the stone was fake, supposing that perhaps they had discovered his false identity. And then his magical power was depleted. Taking his pills, he raised his staff. This one was surprised because it was Flora, asking what she was doing outside the boundaries. She became nervous and replied with the same question. This one believed it wasn't her business, and behind her appeared her friend, crying because she had gotten lost. The professor asked them to follow him, and Flora had seen that he took some pills, wondering if he suffered from an illness. And they met the director, who asked them what they were doing in the silent forest. But Flora accepted all the responsibility. She had entered there and risked her friend's life. And the professor was getting them out of that place. The director then thought nothing was wrong. Students could always make mistakes, giving some questions that involved the protagonist. But this one answered confidently since he had an alibi, thus concluding the mission. Then she felt she could trust Ludger now, since she observed his reaction in the forest. And she didn't feel any sign of a lie, but they still had to spread more rumors to get rid of those damned rats. And the jewel was safe. It was told that that stone had ruined an entire kingdom due to its danger, and now that they knew the real one was safe, they had to leave. But the protagonist had used his stealth magic, feeling that at first he didn't believe anything. But now he confirmed it. That stone definitely had a greater power. With it, he could know where the other parts of his relic were, starting to accumulate magic, asking her to show him what she wanted to see. Later, he knew he couldn't tell her where each piece was, but at least he had told her some locations. And one was very close by. Later, he was very tired from using magic and told Hans that one part of the relic was in the city. Based on what the stone showed him, it should be at the auction house, asking Elle to check the auction items. The next day, he goes to his office, but is interrupted by Flora, asking what he was doing there. But she only became nervous because she wanted to ask him about his medicine. But she remained silent, and since she had nothing to say, Ludger left. But magic appears. It was coordinate magic. Flora had discovered it. This surprises him, letting her in, since she didn't have a reward because he never thought any student could decipher it. So he would think about what her reward would be. This one, upon entering, didn't understand what those formulas were. She had never seen them. And then Ludger showed her what he had been working on. Something out of the ordinary. She didn't understand what that was. Her head was about to split in half. She didn't know what that sensation was. After 30 minutes, she demanded what that was. This one told her it was the Klein bottle. It was just an experiment. But changing the subject, since he had realized that she had a specialty in feeling magic. When she saw the formula, her pupils dilated and her fingers trembled. She, worried, asked him if he wasn't interested in her specialty, but he denied it. However, it could be different with other people, so he asked her to keep that hidden. Upon leaving, she remained confused, wondering if she knew more people with specialties. Meanwhile, at night, Ludger was preparing for a date. Hans, elegantly dressed, arrives in a luxury car. At the meeting place, it was a very renowned auction house for its exclusivity and for being a meeting point for organizations, but they headed to the 4th floor, where fighting was forbidden, which made it a safe place for clandestine meetings. Upon going up, he realized there was no security and the atmosphere was different. They had been invited to a room where 4 people were present. Here it is told that Ludger acted as his character James Moriarty, who was asked why he had come to the city, and also why he was causing problems and destroying the Red Society. She was Violetta, in charge of the women of the Black Rose, but they silenced her. He had only done that to eliminate the city's filth. But this one was interrupted by Kurukos, demanding that he say why he had accepted his invitation to attend there. He must have something in mind. Ludger accepted. He wanted everyone to succeed, so they should work for him. Upon seeing their complaints, he expressed that he would give each of them a percentage of the Red Society, even if they refused to work for him. They had no reason to believe him, but they also lost nothing by accepting. However, he wanted an immediate answer, giving contracts to each one. The business was about bringing history through music and dance, and his objective was to change the depressing environment the city suffered from at night. And during the day, take power from the nobles and transform the city into a prosperous place. And happy. Then they walked happily because everyone had accepted, but they asked her why she followed him, asking Hans to go a little ahead. After talking about his plan, he asked her to calm down, since everything would go well, especially the clothing part. He knew that the nobles managed that business, but now they would make room for people to dress daily, thanks to her specialty in fashion magic. This one thought that since she had agreed to work with him, she couldn't hide. It was told that it was a magic burn which doctors couldn't heal, but Agnes denied it. If she had trusted him, he should show her his gratitude, asking her to check her face. He told her that was true magic. She only became nervous thanking him. An attack arrived. It was an ambush. They expressed their name, feeling how they were alone in an alley. It was their chance for revenge. They were the remaining members of the Red Society. Furthermore, there was a diffusion magic that nullified the use of magic. They only insulted him, but Ludger remained calm, asking her if she wanted to dance. Upon seeing her acceptance, he asked her to watch his back. The attendees couldn't understand if their magic was equally strong. She was a little tired, but Ludger only thought that the people who attacked them hadn't appeared yet. At first, it seemed like there were professionals at the location, so he took her to escape. They screamed not to let him go, and indeed professional assassins jumped to attack. These were assassins who killed for money, subjects extremely strong in hand-to-hand combat. Upon going up and escaping, she managed to cover herself, but they used poison in all their attacks, believing they had to be careful. Ludger believed that this wasn't the right place to fight, so he took her again. After escaping, the assassins see the woman adrift, feeling it was their chance. But they knew the man must be nearby anyway, attacking the possible creator of the trap, but no one was there, and this one was stabbed. Ludger expressed that she shouldn't feel bad, it was just a magic trick. The woman screamed at him to be careful, and his staff was activated. The assassin proclaimed his victory, but Ludger had another hidden weapon, slitting his throat, believing they were good assassins. But he was better. The woman felt that the others were coming, but that anti-magic annoyance was gone. So she would get rid of them. Then Ludger told her why they had attacked him, feeling that his plans would have many problems. That's why he wanted their help. This one accepted, feeling that now she had a very strong ally by her side. Then Hans found himself in his refuge, fighting someone else. This was a new character, a dwarf developer who was previously a slave in the mines of the Kingdom of Lygia, whom they had rescued, better known as Sheridan Lampid. In the middle of the conversation, Hans remembers having faced the strange attackers of the Red Society. Ludger mentioned that there must be someone behind those attacks and decided to rest while their armaments were being repaired. Later, he looks out the window and realizes they are dangerous people, and this one is the protector of the Order of the Night Knights. Tarana Lionhall, wondering why they were there, believing he didn't want to get involved with her. And Sheridan arrived, who showed him her best equipment, including a hidden knife that shot paralyzing needles. The impressed knight commented on the quality of the work, and she thought he had very good taste, thanking him for his compliments. And so Ludger tells the dwarf that he was going to leave for a moment, but he had something else to ask her. Elsewhere, the Night Order finds themselves observing the disaster from the previous battle, in which the bodies had the assassins' daggers. This was a plan by Ludger to incriminate the Kaltsapa Society, who were the Assassin Society. But she wasn't entirely convinced, as it was very unusual for that to happen because all the events were too confusing. That's why she didn't rule out that the subject who murdered the wolves, the professor from Soren, was involved. For that hour, she insists on continuing to search for clues in the academy. The next day, Ludger met Professor Selina, who informed him that a knight from the National Security Office was looking for him. This one froze, but went to meet him. This one asked him everything that happened with the werewolf. Ludger was calm, feeling that if it wasn't the general, there wouldn't be problems, telling all the details of what happened. Then they said goodbye with a firm handshake. Upon leaving, they asked him if he had discovered if that subject was a trained person. He said that even though he wore gloves, there was no reaction. He was just an average mage. The woman didn't understand. She felt they were close, but now they were starting from scratch, believing they had to go look for more clues. Ludger knew they might go to interrogate him, so he knew that subject hadn't attended there for nothing. That handshake was clearly a magic measurement test, which is why he had asked his subordinate for an artificial skin. Just in case, feeling that they were good at solving cases, but he had gotten ahead of them, believing that now was the time to give his tests. And so the first examination period began. He knew they had studied a lot, so those who got the top 5 grades would personally be taught the formula for the origin code by him. But if he discovered they were cheating, he would punish them severely. And if everyone was ready, he was going to start. After 3 hours, all the exams were collected. The students were exhausted. They never thought the questions would be so difficult. Meanwhile, the girl wanted to return the book he had lent her, but Ludger asked her to keep it, since she would need it in the future, asking her to try her best. Elsewhere, the director couldn't believe what she saw on the test. She had never seen an evaluation with such perfect questions. They were about basic knowledge, but with appropriate difficulty. And every question contained a trap, feeling that all professors should see that. Especially Professor Chris, who taught almost the same concepts. This one, elsewhere, was completely furious, since even the director felt she should receive advice from that damned ruined noble. Cursing Ludger, expressing that he would see him soon. He would take revenge for the embarrassment that damned noble had made him suffer. Then Linny felt she should take a break after the exams, but she ran into a group of nobles, who bothered her about the rumors they had heard about her class. She was the commoner who thought she was noble, even sitting next to a princess, starting to bother her one. And again, even when she answers them, one grabs her arm and throws her to the ground. expressing that they would teach her never to answer a noble. But someone asks them what they are doing. It was Preut and Gulberg. These tried to excuse themselves with arrogant and despotic thoughts, but they threw him to the ground, asking him for silence, since he was just trash that stained the name of nobles, asking everyone to leave immediately. She thanked him for everything he did. This one invited her to eat, since her food was no longer good. After much insistence, she accepted, and the young woman was surprised to discover that he had prepared the food himself. And she delighted in its taste. Then they had a good time together, believing that the rumors about him and how bad he was with commoners were just that. Just rumors. Later, Ludger meets the professor, who is going with her students for a practical class. And they ask him if he could accompany her, since it was her first practical class and she was a little nervous. Ludger, so as not to look bad, accepted. In the forest, the professor showed everyone the spirit she could summon, surprising the students, feeling that they should try. She even told the professor the same thing, but he refused since he had no affinity with spirits. She said it was impossible, but upon realizing it, it was true. All the spirits were afraid of them, except the advanced level ones. Ludger affirmed he had already told her. After much conversation, she accepted it and left with her students. Ludger felt relieved. They had almost caught him because it wasn't that the spirits feared him, but that there was a high-level spirit behind him. Since it wasn't of nature, it had to be someone from the society who must be watching him. So he asked permission to go observe the forest. And indeed, upon walking, a message appeared, which said where to go. Ludger realized that the original body was not there, and this one, without beating around the bush, told him that she needed his help to sow chaos, mentioning that her role is destruction. Her name was Esmeralda, and she was frustrated because mages had been countering her plans. And she suggests that he might be planning a terrorist attack this week, so she asks Ludger to mask his identity and help her, assuring him that she would compensate him for his actions, but the protagonist suspects that the director still mistrusted him, so he couldn't accept her offer. This one only felt they were excuses because he was lazy. Ludger just ignored her and never wanted to see her again. This one stops him since she had heard he had a subordinate, but that couldn't be. The great assassin always did things alone. Moreover, she was a second-order person trying to make him angry. Ludger felt she knew nothing about him. He had even come for his help, and all she did was push him further away, asking her if she dared to underestimate him. Upon sensing that aura, this one asked for forgiveness, saying it was all a joke. Ludger became serious, expressing that she should never doubt his loyalty to Order Zero again. If so, one of them was going to have to pay the price. This one just accepted and left the place. The protagonist after that feels that his next mission is to discover who Esmeralda is, who he knew could control spirits. She had a young voice and was at the academy, and just then an event for professors was approaching. And academy sponsors. That would be his chance to discover her. Meanwhile, someone on the second floor was watching him, believing that his flames had been felt. He was stronger than he thought, but he would leave a gift at the next event. Then it is told that the blue-haired girl was convinced to go to said event to work as a waitress, since she was recommended by the noble who saved her, and thus she would have a source of income. Then, the much-anticipated event had arrived. All professors and sponsors of the academy had attended, and everyone was surprised by a presence. That of Ludger Chelsea. Everyone had heard rumors about him, who, upon observing, knew that those present had many magical qualities. But his objective was to look for Esmeralda. Just then, the professor speaks to him, but this one only expressed that he was busy, and he hears a familiar voice with discomfort. And he expresses to the subject that Professor Selinda had plans with him, which is why he had rejected her. This one, upon finding out who he was, didn't care. He was just a new professor. In contrast, he was the new director of the Evan Company. So they should step aside, starting to insult him, but Ludger grabbed his arm, expressing that he didn't care who he was, asking him to try touching him one more time. And just then his servant intervenes asking for calm, but this one is also hit for feeling that his job was to defend him, starting to cause a scene. And just then the director arrived, and this one asked her how she had trained her professors, how they could treat the new director of the company like that. This one felt that her professors were of the highest quality. Moreover, her father still hadn't handed over the company, and he looked very angry about the scandal. This one didn't understand why she was there, and the professor, after threatening them for the disrespect, proposed a duel to demonstrate the power of her professors. Ludger didn't know. It was going to draw a lot of attention, but he had no choice. Accepting the duel, the young man asked his assistant to represent him, but just by giving the order. The bodyguard had already been defeated. The father only bowed, asking for forgiveness, and so Ludger left to get some air. But the professor thanked him and wanted to introduce him to her colleagues. Ludger felt that was the opportunity to know if any of them was Esmeralda. But after the presentation, he deduced that it wasn't any of them, believing he lacked information. Taking a drink, and upon taking it, it was Renee, who told him about the work and why she was there. Then he was with Zenilda observing those present, and she told him about her new student, who was very skilled and was also working here today. Her name was Johanna Lovett. Ludger now suspected her, asking where she was going, but she was just going to drop off some trays, believing that he had been very sensitive and paranoid lately. Then he heard the nobles talking about the textile industry, feeling there was something new. But soon they would remove him from the way. Ludger only thought they were idiots. Their little interest and little evolution would cause his ally to completely change his world, and at that moment he felt enormous pain. The professor worried, but Ludger only said it was because he lacked air, going out onto the balcony. And he was going to take his pills, since due to the duel and the concentration of finding Esmeralda, he had used too much magic while Chris observed him. And when Ludger entered, everything was covered in flames. The professors present tried to stop the beast's attacks. Some were in charge of getting people out. Others, like the animism professors, summoned their spirits to protect them, and others tried to attack. But the flames were not simple flames. Mid-class spells were not enough to repel them. Ludger understood that wasn't fire magic, but it was more like magma. That meant that spirit was of the highest level. The 6th rank, but he didn't understand why it had a humanoid shape. Normally, it should have an animal shape or plant, and now that he realized it, that thing had no inferior form. That meant it was an invocation through a medium. And according to that thing's position, his suspicion was real. Student Johanna Lovett must be Esmeralda. For now, he would take care of that thing, but looking ahead he saw Renee, who was trapped. Telling herself that she had to hurry up and escape, but her legs were trapped. And just then a magma attack approached her, accepting her death, but Ludger asked her if she was okay. He tried to calm her down. However, Renee felt a strange sensation, like a déjà vu. Asking the professor if they had ever met in the past, upon seeing his doubt, she expressed that nothing. She had just gotten confused, and they asked her to stay safe. Ludger felt they had almost discovered him. But he had to concentrate, activating Etha Nocturnus. The professors, for their part, tried to attack with everything they had. But their efforts were in vain, asking everyone to flee the place. But they were surprised because Ludger appeared on top of the beast, who used ice powers to attack, and then it was revealed where the invocation came from. The professors understood that it was a medium. Ludger believed he didn't have enough power, but he could concentrate all his magic on those coordinates, freezing the tray. The monster only screamed in pain, expressing to them that it didn't matter if they defeated it, as they would soon burn. He would make sure of it. After the incident, Ludger explained how he realized it was a medium. The elf only thanked him, since without him, many professors would have died. The next day, the news came out in the newspapers, telling of the terrorist attack. Ludger felt that this situation had been good for discovering who Esmeralda was. But he couldn't inform the academy, since if his identity was discovered, the Black Dawn would suspect him. The right time to act hadn't come yet, and he read an article about the auction house, which had reinforced security due to the attack, feeling that was annoying. And someone called him asking him to get up as he had asked. She would show him how much the slums had changed. Upon walking, everything shown, they had implemented streets. Of pavement, as Ludger had said. Kirikou was working on a musical to replace the circuses. Others were preparing the magazine he requested. Father and daughter planned to gather a bunch of stories and writers to make a library. And the children spread rumors about everything. Furthermore, that was the Zaster he had asked for, where she would make clothes and invest in luxurious brands. Ludger was very proud and now told her that she should move to the next stage and meet with the other people. Here some characters are introduced. This blonde subject who was very womanizing but very good at treasure hunting. His name was Alex, a new member of his group Uknoan. Then, upon arriving, at their base, there was also a young lady expert in medicine and experiments. Her name was Bellaluna Fitana. And lastly, Pantos and Arpa. The big guy didn't talk much, but the child did, who when they were all gathered confessed that he was Ludger's son. Or something like that, since in his childhood he had saved and educated him. It was also told that the big guy was a beast man, who possessed enormous strength, but even so, in his past, he had lost a fight against Ludger. That's why he followed him, and the protagonist began to tell all the attributes of each one, expressing that's why he had gathered them. Although Violetta was not so sure about being there. Since everyone was great, but they calmed her down. If she was there, it was because her abilities were extraordinary, just like those of her companions. Asking them if she accepted to join. Upon hearing those words, she accepted, and since everything was ready, it was time to start their plan. He mentioned that in the following days they would assault the auction. Of cunts. The blonde had something to say, since from what he remembered, no one had been able to assault that auction. Moreover, after the previous incident, security had been improved, asking if he was. Sure, Ludger nodded. He had a plan, opening a blueprint that had cost him to obtain. And his objective was right there. The next day, Ludger arrived at the academy and met the professor, who was talking to someone. Upon greeting this person, he just looked at him strangely and left. Then Ludger asked her how she was, since they hadn't seen each other since that incident. This one was grateful to him, even her assistant could be sure. Ludger pretended not to know her, and Celinda said she was a little embarrassed for not having done anything at that moment, giving many points for that. But Ludger calmed her down. Unlike her, he couldn't smile brightly and be kind to people. So his attitude was key at that moment, since he managed to evacuate everyone and calmly deal with the people. This one thanked him looking at the floor and rang the class bell, saying goodbye. While all that was heard by his assistant, who thought the girl was completely shameless. Ludger challenged her, but asked her to investigate that girl. This one responded as enthusiastic as always. Later that afternoon, at the auction house, the next director was there, angry because his guest still hadn't arrived. Feeling that this was his chance to give his company the push and regain his father's trust. And just then his guest arrived, introducing himself as manager, Ivan Luke. This one felt it was a pleasure to meet him. His name was Argerar Musla, but clearly it was the giant and the blonde who quickly gained confidence. And they asked the subject for a favor. He told them that they had given him a valuable object on the way, and he needed to store it. They were magic drops to produce high-quality magic. This one was surprised, but nodded. There was a good place to store that object. He had to follow him. 30 minutes earlier, it was told that the blonde was surprised because the woman had designed clothes very similar to those of the southern nobles. Ludger explained that he needed him to act as a duke and Pantos as his bodyguard, since he had heard that the Luke Company was trying to expand into magical tools. And as a result, the magic drops were a necessary ingredient to create such tools. That's why. They had to create a connection with Evan, and he passed him those magic transmitters, in which he told everything he was seeing, and the route they took to reach the building's basement. And so, after telling everything they saw, they went up to the first floor again. Now, they had to follow the plan to strengthen ties, but the blonde had a problem, telling it to Ludger since Enyad Joiners was present. Who was his ex-girlfriend? Ludger doesn't understand why an authority like her was there, asking him to escape immediately. Alex told Evan that he needed to leave now. They would talk about business soon. Then Alex told everyone the basic structure that was in the building. It was the same as the map. However, the warehouses were divided into 3 rooms, each according to differences in importance. The auctions were going to last 3 days. Each day, the items from each room would be put up. The others believed that they should go on the 3rd day, where the items would be more valuable. But Ludger wanted to go on the 2nd day, since on the 3rd there would be more security. On the 1st, there would be a lot of attention, so he asked the girl to hurry up with her request. To Violetta, to find the construction specialist, Alex was the only one with the problem of his ex. Feeling that they had known each other for a long time, but he would take care of it. And if there were no other variables, the plan remained as it was. Elsewhere, this woman expressed that she had finally arrived. Her name was Kaisi, and she was accompanied by Betty, her assistant. Both were detectives. The woman was incredibly intelligent. With just some data, she knew it was going to rain at that moment. And she was in that place because there were rumors that incredibly strange things were happening in that city. Like the wolves, the burned people, and the beasts. And especially because of the name James Moriarty, whom everyone thought she had murdered. But at the moment of their battle, she never saw his body, so her instinct said he was still alive. But that wasn't all. 5 years ago, multiple werewolves attacked civilians. The so-called Bloody Night appeared that day, and a single man murdered everyone and the leader of the beasts. His name was Van Helsing, but he disappeared. Then, a subject with a similar appearance appeared 4 years ago, a mage who stole multiple treasures. His name was Arsene Lupin, who was also never seen again. And 3 years ago, a subject named James Moriarty was about to start a war. And he also disappeared completely. She had a hypothesis that they were all the same person, but they were just suppositions. That's why she was there, and her lodging destination was the Kuntz auction house. In it, they greeted the princess, who asked for a room because she was tired, knowing what kind of person Evan was. Meanwhile, Ludger was behind her, expressing that the plan of the Ognoan society would begin now. Alex felt excited, but only upon advancing, he saw her, telling Violetta that he would take a little longer. This one, upon finding out, thought she should do it herself. It was told that their first mission was to find the elevator key to reach the basement. And this one tried to flirt with a guard at the place, who took her to his room, believing that she couldn't forget her room keys. Not to mention when she was so drunk. This one thanked him, and the subject, upon seeing the opportunity, felt it was his lucky day. But Violetta, smiling, grabbed his arm and threw him to the ground, expressing that he shouldn't trust women, feeling that now she had to look for the key. Elsewhere, the auction started with the Siren's Tears jewels. Everyone was amazed, just like the princess, but someone said they were fake, expressing the reasons. Furthermore, she knew she was the princess, although no one noticed. She gave her a series of data linking her as Princess Arendir, introducing herself as Cassie Selmy, a detective. The princess recognized her by name. She was famous, asking why she was there. She only expressed that it was due to some rumors, and on the first floor, Ludger walked by and greeted Evan Luke, who felt honored to see him again, asking his guards to accompany his great guest. This prevents Ludger from moving completely, so he asks his support to continue the plan. This was Hans, so he activated the device, but he didn't quite understand how to use it. And someone called him, asking what they were doing. Hans didn't know what to do, since he didn't like fighting. He was a coward. But the child, when seeing the officer approach, sent him a punch with all his strength. Hans didn't understand who that child was, but this one told him all his achievements, and it was clear he was strong. Since he had been instructed by Ludger, and when the officer's partner was leaving, he asked what was happening. And the child faked his voice, expressing that nothing was wrong, calming the guard, asking Hans if he had done well. This one still didn't understand who that child was. It was incredible. Meanwhile, the blonde was going down the stairs wondering where Violetta was. And so they stumbled together, apologizing to each other, but exchanging the keys. And so they notified the big guy about the next stage. This one was using Ludger's magic to hide, and since he had the keys, they had to advance. Upon entering the next room, It was as they suspected. There were more guards as they approached the auction hall, asking the inventor girl if it was her. She accepted, entering the room and leaving a type of tear gas in the place. Everyone asked to remain calm, but they had to leave the place. Alex believed it had already started. Going down the elevator, asking the big guy if he could get rid of those two. Upon seeing them raise their weapons, he calmed them down. He was the one who was with Evan the other day. They should remember his face. These only asked him not to approach, but in a moment, their bodies were slammed against the floor. Alex asked him if he hadn't killed them, but he calmed him down. He had avoided their vital points, and so they informed Hans that everything was ready. So they would enter, while Ludger remained in the auction hall, believing he was still being watched. So he still couldn't move, and he noticed a presence. It was Cassie, who knew who he was from last time. She was a person who was crazy about justice, capable of giving her life for it, wondering what the hell she was doing there. If she intervened, she could make his weeks-long plan go to waste. She was one of the most powerful people he knew, but due to his relaxed attitude, he still knew nothing about his plan. So he had to trust his team. Elsewhere, the guards felt their job was very boring, but something was moving in the vault. After much discussion, it was true. Someone had made a hole in Vault 2. They informed Evan of this, who asked everyone to gather to enter. In the cameras, they didn't understand how they could do it, since this area was underground. But his team was already heading, there was nothing to fear, giving the emergency group the order to remove all items from the other vaults. And giving the order to enter Vault 3, but there was no one inside. This was because the vault had a false recording. Feeling that it should be a trap, their objective should always have been Vault 3, since the elevator now didn't work. Informing them to move the remaining forces there, but that was impossible. Their forces weren't responding, desperately asking if they should call the police, but Evan denied it. If that happened, the news would spread, and they would ruin their auction, feeling he didn't know what to do. Asking him to gather all the remaining emergency team. But the door wouldn't open now. The girl laughed. Her lord's plan had been a complete success. The mission had been completed. They mentioned that they had disguised themselves as emergency guards, whom they asked to move all the artifacts from the third vault. And when they were going up by the elevator, they defeated them all, and Alex broke the only method of ascent, managing to escape safely. Everyone left except Hans, who still hadn't found what he was looking for with Ludger, and felt that those guys were incredible. Each one had exceptional skills, feeling that he was the only weak one in the group. But he slapped himself, believing he had to concentrate, telling Ludger that the others had escaped safely. And he would go there. Besides, his communicator was running out of battery, so he would wait for him in the central hall. Ludger accepted, and believed that finally those guys had joined the troops, and he could get out of there. Hans, upon advancing, believed there was no one because of the tear gas bomb. But he wondered who those guys were, but upon looking at them, an attack was directed towards him. And an explosion appeared. Hooded figures asked everyone to stay still or else they would die upon seeing the slightest complaint from the Lord. They attacked him, murdering him. Everyone fled upon seeing that. The hooded figures ordered to murder them all. Then they would check the corpses and take the money. Ludger doesn't understand how they infiltrated the auction, but this was obvious. It was his own fault. And someone shouted that they were all greedy. Ludger, upon looking closely, recognized that jacket mechanism. They were the same bombs as the Liberation Army. Therefore, they weren't simple thieves. They were aiming to destroy that place, activating his magic. This one felt he was about to die, believing that the entire building must be under attack. And more screams arrived from the other room. They mentioned that dark magic had been used. Ludger felt they were in trouble. There were thieves, liberators, and warlocks, wondering if Hans was okay. Elsewhere, the princess ran for her life, but the liberators recognized her, attacking her to kidnap her. However, someone thought she talked too much. These wondered what that was. They couldn't get out of those things. It was impossible to break them. She explained that it was water gunpowder. It was impossible to break. Her assistant also appeared, capturing 2 people. And Alex's ex also appeared, expressing that it was a relief that she was alive. And since everyone was fine, they had to retreat. Then it turns back to the past. Hans asked Ludger why he had accepted a coward like him on the team. He always left him alone, in fights despite having equal powers. Ludger only expressed that he was aware of his strength, since his power was dangerous. Asking if he didn't use it because he didn't want to hurt people, this one stammered, telling him that before he was an orphan. He couldn't get along with others, even though in his past he met a girl whom he considered a sister, with a promising future, even comparable to him. One day he brought a dog, and when he petted it, it bit him. That was his first transformation. And his first murder. Ludger asked him to free himself from that guilt. At some point, he had to face reality, passing him an object that Hans couldn't believe Ludger had. He felt that at some point he would be between life and death. He could choose to fight or flee, that only depended on his heart. Returning to the present, Han felt that in the end it had happened. He was going to die. The subject felt it had been too easy to get in. Besides, that poor idiot carried magical power in a bag like that, but Han grabbed it, asking him to give it to him. That belonged to his older brother. This one just mocked him and hit him, treating him like trash, feeling that it was incredible that he was still enduring. After shedding so much blood, saying goodbye and thanking him for the gift, Han felt that his body wasn't working well, reproaching himself that if it were the others, they would never have lost in such a pathetic way, realizing that he had always been weak. And he only survived by clinging to Ludger's ankles, and seeing his dagger, he felt that if this was his end, at least he would give his life for his revenge, starting an abnormal transformation. Of the normal, this one felt he was a very stubborn guy, but upon turning around, he didn't understand what the hell that thing was. Everyone feels fear at that moment, seeing that there was something very strange in the auction house. And Alex remembered a conversation with Ludger, whom he demanded that if the giant was the second strongest in combat, and the third was him, who the hell was the first, and the protagonist said it was Hans. Elsewhere, Evan could finally leave, and they told him everything that happened, and at that moment a huge beast emerged on the scene. Nobody knew what the hell that thing was. Those present in the screamed that he was back, the cause of the massacre 5 years ago, the monster Dermend. Evan, upon seeing him, just ran away and an attack approached, but someone cut off his fingers. It was the general of the knights, asking to evacuate the place immediately. He told his soldiers that he didn't know what that was, but his priority was to protect the civilians. And upon seeing the attack, they tried to dodge and counter with what they could, but the monster was much faster than any of their attacks. Its speed made no sense with its size appearance. Elsewhere, the detective found a place to escape, asking them to jump. She was going to help them. Upon being on the floor, they asked if they were okay and felt the huge beast next to them, wondering what was happening. Upon saying it was the beast, it couldn't be her. She had seen its corpse, deducing that it should be an invocation or something related to the human being. Because this one had arms instead of legs, feeling that it should belong to the man she was looking for. He should be close, but he had to stop that monster in the first place. The others were astonished because she had managed to stop it, expressing to everyone that it was the moment. She believed it was too strong to stop it, and the monster, with just a scream, broke her magic. The detective felt that her power was on another level. However, if she gave up, everyone would die, invoking her highest level magic. They were water knights. The knights asked them to attack. It was their opportunity. Ludger, meanwhile, saw the death scene, believing that his friend had finally broken free from his past seal. But now it was a problem, feeling that he couldn't stop him just like that. So he would return in a moment, using his shadow magic. While the attacks worked, they were cutting off some heads protecting the monster. But this one activated a power scream. No one understood what it was, but the earth began to shake, and hundreds of rats approached. They didn't understand how that beast could control those things. Meanwhile, the detective had a phobia of those things, trying to stop them, but these could also jump the barrier, but their allies could also fight. However, the rats headed towards the heads they had managed to remove, and the rats started turning into bodies. And so werewolves appeared, feeling that in the past, werewolves had appeared because of that beast. But they asked for concentration. If they failed, everyone in the city would perish. The detective thought the same. But they couldn't approach the main body. Besides, the rats were appearing. Her companion asked them to leave. But she couldn't since civilians were still present. At least she felt she had to buy time. But Alex's ex felt that if they stayed, they wouldn't be safe either, and at that very instant, the beast stopped moving. Something in the sky appeared. The detective recognized that man. It was James Moriarty. She was sure it was him, wondering if he controlled the beast. While Ludger felt it was obvious his friend wouldn't recognize him, but he was still alive in there. Therefore, he would rescue his brother, drawing his sword and launching forward, managing to position himself and stab the beast. She hadn't understood what he had done. She couldn't even see him, and Ludger was cutting off every wolf head on his back. Although she felt that was useless. If he did that, the heads would transform, but these vanished, believing he must be using some special magic. And he managed to react, believing he shouldn't get distracted. For now, it seemed that man was on their side. It was frustrating, but they would trust him. For now, they had to leave, and Ludger threw tear gas powder. The beast began to fall, but also to gather power to regenerate. However, Ludger knew it, and he also knew that was the moment he was most vulnerable. Using his coordinate magic and positioning himself behind him, invoking a magical circle where two structures pierced the beast's hands. And upon seeing the approaching werewolves, he had bullets for everyone. And so, when they advanced, they were shot by silver bullets. Ludger felt it was time to end that. The beast broke the structures and tried to attack. The protagonist was serene, asking that he must leave that body since it belonged to his brother. The beast lunged to its death, but a bullet hit it, and from behind a type of medicine was injected, which broke all transformation. The protagonist felt they had arrived just in time, so they had to leave there. The others no longer heard the roars, wondering if the beast had perhaps been defeated. On the other hand, they asked Moriarty to stop. Ludger only asked her to leave things for today, but she disagreed, calling him by the name Abraham Van Helsing, or Arsène Lupin. It was all him. Ludger knew her reasoning, but never thought she would discover him, thinking that if he discovered her face, she could never escape again. So he had to eliminate her right now. And she expressed that because of him, there were those attacks, because he belonged to the Black Dawn organization. Ludger doesn't understand why she mentioned the association, nor how she knew her, but if so. He changed his mind, expressing that she was always so perceptive. That's right, he belonged to that organization, believing that there must still be terrorists among the civilians. He had to go save them. Obviously, he wouldn't let himself be caught so easily, but this was because Ludger knew her abilities. So he would take full advantage of her. She would be his weapon against the Black Dawn Society, expressing that he was leaving. She wouldn't let him go, but his attack was easily stopped. No other kid interrupted his incredible strength. Another person wouldn't let him escape, but Alex knew her perfectly, even knowing her secret weapon of the hidden dagger. And so Ludger said goodbye. He couldn't waste any more time saying goodbye to Kazai, expressing that he hoped to see her in the future.